Since then, the international financial institutions have introduced certain specific financial products to improve trade finance with specific focus on women. So I'm not going to the details of these products. It will be quite complex. How does women-owned firms look like in India? There was a survey, again by the World Bank Group itself. World Bank also has something called enterprise survey. Some of you may want to explore the data, how the enterprise survey look like. It's in the public domain. So in India, only 10% of the firms are owned by women. And in a survey, it was found that most of the women-owned firms procure their financial resources only from personal circle. And their borrowing costs are higher than male-owned firms. This is important. Among the women entrepreneurs, only 17% were observed to have some kind of awareness about financial schemes launched by the government or financial institutions. In other words, this highlights or this underlines the importance to create more awareness among women entrepreneurs about financial products and how to approach a bank in taking a loan. Another observation was, when a woman owns a firm, the survey found they are less likely to manage the finances independently. They depend on somebody else. And the last one, another observation is growth financing. What do we mean by growth financing? Suppose you have already established a firm and established some track record. After that, the firm has to grow. To grow the firm, we need more funding. How do we get the funding? The survey finds only 14% of women-owned firms obtain loans for further growth of the firm. Whereas among the male-owned firms, it was about 66% they obtained funds for growth. So what does this data tell us? One, we need to create more awareness among women. Number two, not just awareness, we also need to educate women entrepreneurs to keep trying. That's very important. That's what the ADB survey says. They don't make a second attempt after, it's not that they don't, they are less likely to make a second attempt after the application is rejected for the first time. Any questions so far? Is it something? Okay, then let me move on to the third dimension.
You were talking about India, women-owned firms and the gender gaps. Is it the same in other parts of the globe, or
more or less it's the same? This more or less it is the same, madam. This survey by Asian Development Bank is among the Asian region, but more or less across the world, the ratio, the percentages may differ, but the overall trend is the same. Can I go to the next one, ma'am?
Yeah, please go. Go ahead.
Yes. So I'm coming to the next aspect, which is remittances. So what are remittances? Remittances are personal remittances. Say, for example, some of our relatives or family members are living abroad. They send money home. That's what we call as remittances. How are remittances connected to gender development? It's very, very important. And remittances have certain important characteristics, and how remittances started receiving attention of the of researchers and policymakers in the past 10 years. It's quite very, very interesting area. Nowadays, more and more research papers are coming on the remittances aspect. It's quite simple. All of us who have relatives abroad, we will be receiving money from them. If someone from our family is working abroad, either in Dubai or US or Canada or Australia, they will be sending money for meeting our family expenses or even for savings. So it's a very, very important source of finance for many families, especially if you go to certain pockets of India. people who work in the low skilled labor market. For them, that is the one and only source of income. For them, comparatively, I mean, between working in India and working abroad, even in a low skilled job, they choose to work abroad even in very, very difficult conditions, like especially in certain countries the working conditions are very, very difficult. Still they choose that because it helps them transform their lives. The remittances helps transform their lives. It helps investment in education of their children. Somebody wants to build a house, they won't be able to earn that much money if they are working in India itself, in the domestic economy itself. So when I'm this is applicable even for other low income countries too. I'm using India as an example, but at the same, however, these are applicable for other low income countries as well. So people or migrants who work abroad, they send money back home that is used for educating their children or building a house or improving health. So it's definitely an important source of income for poor families. And at the country level, at the macroeconomy level, it's a very, very important source of foreign exchange for the country. I'm going to show you some statistics about it. There are certain instances when countries rely on migrants during times of crisis. Maybe some of you will remember back in the 1990s and again in the early 2000s, India faced some foreign exchange difficulties. So the government of India then issued certain specific bonds like India Millennium Bonds and Resurgent India Bonds targeting non-resident Indians. These bonds were quite successful that it helped the government of India mobilize a sizable amount of finance to help in managing the crisis. So migrant remittances are a very, very important source of finance both at the micro level and at the macro level. How does, of course, I'm going to be showing some statistics soon. But before that, let's see how do remittances help development? Certain studies show evidence that countries that receive remittances see lower school dropouts. In certain cases, they have observed that when the remittances are more, there is an increase in the average birth weight of babies. Higher educational attainment is observed. And more importantly, migrants transfer knowledge. For example, somebody works in a foreign country, they come home either permanently or on a visit. They educate, they transfer the knowledge, they bring back the knowledge or best practices. For example, in India, a simple example is India, we rarely care about safety. Whereas in the US, everyone cares about safety. So I have observed that many people who work in the US, when they come to India, they impart the knowledge about safety to their friends and families. Safety on everything, like road safety or fire safety or anything. And remittances today have increased to an extent that the amount of remittances is more than official financing. We'll see some statistics. And when the remittances accumulate in the foreign exchange reserves, it increases the credit worthiness of the home country. And remittances are counter-cyclical. I'm going to be explaining this with the help of a graph. How does remittance help female migrants? Or what is the connection? Certain studies show that, well, among the gender split, among men and women, globally, about 47% of migrants are women. But women face double disadvantage. What is that? One, in a foreign country, you are an immigrant. So working in the home country, we have all the liberties, we know all the rules, regulations, we know people, we can move as we want. Whereas the moment we come to a foreign country, we are subject to the laws, regulations, and the visa restrictions of the country where we are in. For example, many Indian men who work here, their spouses may not be allowed, their wives may not be allowed to work even though they are well qualified. It's a problem. you might have read in newspapers, many Indian housewives in US do not get the work authorization to work, even though they are well qualified. So it becomes a problem for the women. They are not able to participate in the labor force, even though they have the skill and knowledge, even though they are qualified. So first disadvantage is, as an immigrant, due to laws and regulations in a foreign country, the person is facing certain difficulties, disadvantage as an immigrant. Secondly, as a woman, she faces additional disadvantages because of family responsibilities to her children, and any other challenges, cultural challenges. At the same time, one good news is, in recent years, it has been observed that labor force participation of migrant women, especially when they come on their own, is higher than non-migrant women. Oh, of course, it's quite obvious. Like, suppose if a woman chooses to stay in the home country itself, versus, say, let's imagine two friends, A and B, Miss A and Miss B. Miss A chooses to remain in the home country, Miss B comes to a foreign country. Because of the restrictions in the home country, often found in low-income countries, either cultural barriers or institutional barriers or psychological barriers, women who stay in the home country are less likely to participate in the labor force. At the same time, women who go to a foreign country, especially advanced countries, they get more freedom, more opportunities to work. So that's what the study says. So it is observed that labor force participation of migrant women is higher than non-migrant women. And another interesting trend in recent days is women migrate not only as dependents but also on their own. Especially in the US, I can see in my own circle, many women come here on their own. They study, they come study in the US universities, get a job here, and they are independent on their own. It's a very good thing. So naturally, as anyone gets financial independence, there is more and more freedom to decide on one's life. When it comes to remittance, sending money back home, interesting fact is, women remit more than men. Say, for example, someone earns $100. A man earns $100. A woman also earns $100. The male generally sends, say, let's assume $40 back home. On the other hand, the female, the woman, she sends $60 to $70. So the remittance, the proportion of remittance by women is much higher. Even though the earnings may be lower, the proportion, the share of the remittance in their total income is higher. That's what various studies say. So naturally, the financial independence results in a transformative effect on the gender roles within the family. So especially in a foreign country, when both the husband and wife work, the traditional gender roles decline. So there is a kind of equality in family. Studies also prove, so for example, by a study by Ferrand and Tuccio, they say that migration towards more gender equal countries promotes gender equality in the home country. This is quite interesting. This is almost similar to what we saw in the FDA example. So when a family migrates to a more gender equal country, they look at the society there, they learn the best practices there. Okay, in a foreign country, men and women are equal. Let's also follow that. Then they transform that best practice back home. It creates a demonstration, a domino effect in the society back home. Another study by Hadi says, it finds that families where female migrants are there, they pay more attention to education of daughters. At the same time, there are also certain constraints imposed by the originating countries. There could be some cultural constraints even now in many families in low-income countries, or especially a country like India, or certain countries, there is a constraint that a woman, a girl, the daughter-in-law should not work or something. So there are certain constraints. But once we remove, assuming that there are no such constraints, migration definitely helps in achieving gender equality. It strengthens, it provides more independence, financial independence to female migrants. Just to give you an idea of the NRI deposits as a share of total external debts. Over the years, in the past 25 years, there is a long-term overall increase in the NRI deposits from a meager level of somewhere around 12 to 13% in 1991. Today, almost one fourth, or about 25% of India's total external debt is accounted for by NRI deposits. So this is the level of money that comes back to India. These are deposits. I'm not calculating, showing remittances here. This is only deposits. Nevertheless, it gives a rough idea. The next two charts are important to understand the key role played by remittances. The blue line, foreign direct investment, saw an exponential growth until 2008, and then it starts declining in 2009 because of the financial crisis. Then it again rose up, and after this, say 2010-11, there is a steady decline. In other words, in economics, this is what we call a cyclical effect. But look at the trend of remittances. There's a steady increase. So researchers say that an important advantage of remittances is that it is not cyclical, rather it is counter-cyclical. In other words, during times of crisis, migrants tend to send more money to their families back home, provided their jobs are not at risk. Another way of looking at it, at this data. Okay, this chart we looked at from the view of absolute amounts. Now let's see the same data as a percentage of GDP. So all this I'm showing it at the global level. Flow of funds to low and middle income countries. So foreign direct investments fluctuates again after the 2008 financial crisis as a percentage of GDP of low and middle income countries. There's a steady decline in foreign direct investment. But at the same time, let's look at the personal remittances by migrants. As a percentage of GDP, now the gap is kind of almost narrowing now. Let's see what was there in 2003, 4, 5. This was the period when there was economic boom. During the boom period, FDI increased exponentially. But at the same time, when it decreases, the personal remittances kind of increases around this time. So in other words, what research has shown is that remittances tend to be counter-cyclical. In a way, it helps countries and families sustain cyclical effects. So any questions so far? So
maybe how many more minutes you will take? It is almost 4. Going to be 4.
I'm at the last slide, ma'am. This is the last slide.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So in order to conclude, what can we do? So we have seen how international financial flows, either in terms of foreign direct investments or trade finance or remittances, help or interact with gender dimensions. What can we do as researchers or as students? So I have certain thoughts. This is, for example, there is, as Madam said in her opening remarks, it's very, very important that we strive to achieve financial literacy to women. So as students or as researchers, we need, within our local community, we have to strive, we have to work towards improving the financial literacy of women. When I say financial literacy, it's not just household financial literacy, it's about financial literacy as an entrepreneur, not merely as a simple local entrepreneur, but a woman entrepreneur should know how to access export credit, how to access import credit. So that kind of financial literacy we need to give to women entrepreneurs. And secondly, we also need to educate women on trade opportunities. As we saw in the initial slides, women face difficulties in terms of creating networks, in terms of there is an information asymmetry between men exporters and women exporters. So we need to bridge this gap. So as academicians and as researchers, we can work towards bridging this gap within our community. And thirdly, we have to create more awareness campaigns or awareness sessions to women entrepreneurs on financial schemes to avail export finance. As far as I understand, currently most of the schemes, most of these sessions are for across the country. Mostly we help women entrepreneurs for smaller credits, but we have to help them. We have to give them knowledge in accessing export credit at a larger level. And we can also conduct studies at the local level on women-owned firms or women-managed firms. And we can also do some studies, local level studies on remittances. Remittances, currently studies are there at the international level. And at the country level or the district level, here and there some studies are coming in recent days. We can contribute to such studies within our community. And we can also collaborate with the financial institutions at the local level to enhance financing for women entrepreneurs, how they can collaborate, what kind of education is required, what kind of barriers to women face, and how we can bridge the barriers, how we can remove the barriers. So these are the areas where we as academicians or students can work on, is what I feel. So any questions so far? I hope the thoughts I shared are useful for everybody.
Dr. Prasanna, thank you very much. And there are also questions there on your chat box. You can refer.
Yes, ma'am.
And you still to go or you're closing your presentation?
I have it open, ma'am. I can show it.
Now, no. Your presentation is over?
Yes.
Okay. Now you can open it for discussion.
Yes. So I'm looking at the questions.
Yeah, please do that. So thank you very much. I just summarized what Dr. Prasanna has presented. So we, in the 45 minutes interaction, he could throw light on the international finance, the international trade, and the remittance, deposits, and the gender gaps and gender issues on these areas, particularly how the structural barrier in the social context to women are late entrants, and therefore men are already there, and therefore there is a maybe there will be a saturation point for them, then women will be fast moving. And of course, as we have been observing, there are gender barriers in terms of access to finance and also the lack of knowledge. And as rightly pointed out, there is asymmetry of information, and that has led to women, and that is because of lack of networking on the one hand. And as you rightly pointed out, that there is a question of what you call lack of second attempt. So normally, when you are not able to succeed in first attempt, you will give up. And that is again the social barrier. It is not the personal barrier, maybe partly personal barrier, but social. They have their own other engagements to do, and therefore so all these are to be taken. But at the same time, when you said that employees, they are the first to be fired out, that they are disadvantages, and also in terms of other positive aspect, you said that the remittances more from women, and that is to be appreciated. Yes. That is happening in the very grassroots also. You earn 100 rupees, take 90 rupees there home, whereas the men's income will be like 50 rupees or less than that. So with this kind of interaction, of course, he has really thrown light on gender concerns, gender issues, and also made very good observations, suggestions, etc. Now let us listen to the questions raised by the participants, and he may be able to answer some of the question. One question is, what is human capital? That's a very basic question asked, and since you mentioned that, because these are all mixed students and faculty members, and therefore there will be some questions on that kind of that questions also. You can answer what is human capital and then move on to the other.
Yes, I'm just reading all the questions at one go,
Okay, okay.
so that is. So there is a question on what is human capital, and there is another question on what is the reason for
Reason for
ignorance
the
among women,
ignorance among the women about the government schemes. Yeah.
and how do you define microfinance schemes and the role in the life of artisans during the pandemic. And there is one question on how FDA influences care economy. I'm not sure what is meant by care economy.
Care economy is the important term in women's studies, that is unpaid work. The whole lot
Oh,
of
okay.
unpaid work that the women render or men without payment. It is invisible, it is not counted as work. That's what UN says, that women does 66% of the work, whereas get only 10% of the income. So the whole
Oh, yes,
elderly
yes,
care,
yes,
child care, even the cattle rearing and other things, it's all care
yes,
economy. It's priceless, not paid.
yes. I understand. Thank you for that one. So starting with that, the human capital, like any other capital, it's like say your education, your health, all your network, your social capital, everything that facilitates or helps you to transform your life, to go from one level to another level in life. You need education, you need certain skills. The combination of your education, skills, network, all these are, and health, all these are put together, we call as human capital. In other words, what is capital? In general, what is capital? Capital is something that you invest in generating some income. So in finance, in the world of finance, we use financial, we measure in terms of money. In our well-being, we measure in terms of our health, in terms of education, our network, everything. All together, we call as human capital, or access to institutions, where we stand in the society, everything, all together. Questions. Suddenly the window is missing. Well, on the influence of FDI on care economy, I don't think, there is any direct relationship. Somebody, to my knowledge, no such study has been done, but we can hypothesize that, as more and more women come to the labor market, there should be some kind of influence. I'm not aware, and I don't think any study has been done so far. Maybe this is another area where some of the researchers can take up as their MPhil or PhD thesis. And what is the reason why women are not aware? It's just that they are not in the system for a long time. As more and more women start networking, create, discuss among themselves, naturally the knowledge asymmetry will be bridged. For example, there are very many women networks happening nowadays. Say, for example, women bloggers, women in technology, women in finance. Such conferences and such events are happening all over the world. So, women in exports, I have not heard so far. If someone can make such an arrangement, it will help bridge the information asymmetry. And there is an interesting question. Despite high FDI influence in India, women's work participation rate has declined sharply in India. It's a very interesting observation, and this decline is not only in India, but in several parts of the world. This has this has largely to do with factors other than FDI as well. In the past 8 to 10 years, especially after the 2008 financial crisis, there is an overall decline in economic activity across the world. So that is one of the possible causes for the decline in women's participation. I also, when I looked at the data, I also observed similar decline for men as well. But however, the rate of decline for women was higher. So naturally, when there is a crisis, the impact is more severe on women than men. Are there any differences in legal provisions as far as men and women are concerned? I don't think there is any legal restrictions. As far as law is concerned, law is open and equal for men and women. It's only the awareness that matters. Are there any alternative measures to increase the percentage of working capital for women, women-owned firms? Percentage of working capital. I'm not sure whether they mean percentage of working capital availed by women-owned firms or percentage of working capital eligible for women-owned firms. If I interpret this from the perspective of eligibility, then from the bank's point of view, we can say that bank only looks at from the financial health of the firm, whether it is owned by male or female. Bank is in the business of taking risk based on the depositor's money. So bank would not discriminate between male owned or female owned firms. It will only look at it will determine the eligibility based on the financial health and the business opportunities, business prospects of the firm. Well, there's a question on are there any significant decline in urban women employment? I'm not aware. Maybe I should state this: women's gender issues or gender studies is not my area of expertise, so I may not be able to answer some of the questions specific to gender studies. And in your presentation, while mentioning about the World Bank or other global institutional financing, men are having. Well, so for this question as to how men have more connections, it was based on a survey. It was not by World Bank, but there were certain other literatures, including an Asian Development Bank study. So it was based on a primary survey. And any other question did I missed or?
I can substantiate Dr. Prasanna on the question of FDI and its influence on care economy. In fact, we have been hearing the other feminist scholars last 2 days, for the past couple of days, where it was emphasized about the care economy, and yesterday it was very much on care economy, how women's work is not counted, etc. And there is a very popular study by Maria Miles, who is an economist basically. She writes on how these women's social reproduction, whatever the reproduction, social reproduction, I define it as work that the women does for making others to regain their energy in the family. So all the social reproductive activities, whether it is cooking or washing or cleaning, etc., and taking care of the animal husbandry, all these are really paying a huge subsidy to the capitalist economy, where without this care economy, the men may not be able to comfortably go on extend their labor there. And so as long as this care economy rests with the women without payment or with payment, if FDI companies are mostly the corporates, and if they come and account for these care economy, it will be good, like provision of creches, and irrespective of whether the man or the woman working, the creche can be there common. The father can also take the child, provided that is not breastfed. Otherwise, the men can also take. So some kind of what we call in women's studies or in gender studies, the concept strategic gender needs and practical gender needs. Practical gender need is to provide the facility there in the women's place. Rather, if it is provided there in the men's workplace also to take care of the child, then there it is really helping in taking these women out of this burden of care economy to a certain extent, so that that particular time will be available to improve their productivity, to enhance their productivity and contribute to. All said and done, we have been talking about more participation of women in the context where it is already declining, as you already pointed out, that there is a decline in employment participation for the past 2.5 decades, for women particularly, and it is particularly so in the agriculture context and the informal sector also, formal sector also. So what I feel is that the FDIs, whoever brings FDIs, they have to also take and focus on reducing the women's burden, and by subsidizing to certain extent whatever facilities that they could provide to the employee's family. Therefore, thereby some kind of a support system will be provided. So that is what I think, that perspective.
Yes,
And it is not only FDI, but all other corporates can also do that.
of course.
And of course, as the last question was talking about a very serious question, like uh, the global institutions financing men are having more connections than women. That is historical, as you pointed out from the Asian Development Bank study, that the women are late entrants, they are late starters. So even in the education, in the if you look at from the class perspective, even those who are now into education like business school, or so it is all the one class of women. Not all the women from across the class and caste are able to participate. So those women who are making a mark also is from drawn from very higher and upper income groups, and therefore we have to wait. And there has to be both support from both demand and supply sides. That is what. And so on the one hand, the global institutions, if you go and approach, I have been working with women entrepreneurs, I'm sharing this experience. When you go and approach the bank, there will be all in the paper that collateral free loans will be given, so many schemes are there, subsidies are available, etc., etc. But who is to decide? It is the bank manager, because the risk is on him or her, and
Yes,
therefore you have to be little careful while these women are to be careful by approaching the bank, and in spite of repeated visits they are not able to be successful, and therefore they give up. I'm talking about the very ordinary class of women, not the one who are like the CEOs or the other kind of people. They are able to manage, and the banks are willing and financial institutions are willing to support. So there should be a condition where, whether it is FDI or any other financial institutions, international finance, etc., to reach the women who are really aspiring for to become entrepreneurs, but they are not able to enter at all because of lack of finance and lack of access
correct.
to finance. So that is a condition on which we need to really work on. And you can also take forward the suggestions to your own finance corporation, where
Of course, ma'am.
you are working
Yes,
in Asia and East Asian countries and South Asian economies, and therefore you will be able to do something.
of
So
course.
now you can reflect.
Yes, I really thank you for giving me an overview on this care economy, which I was not aware. It was quite informative and very helpful to me as well. On your suggestion of on your suggestion regarding providing more access to finance, women's access to finance for women, already certain schemes are there. I mean, recently, especially after this 2008 financial crisis, in many, I mean, the international financial institutions introduced certain trade finance products by having women as target. I mean, there are certain specific goals where so many women should be reached out, so many women entrepreneurs or women-owned firms should be uh, helped, and even in other forms of lending as well. Some or in some or other way, there are certain goals to reach more women. So the awareness and efforts are definitely there in recent days, and I'm sure that at some point we will definitely be bridging the gap, and we will be addressing the information asymmetry as well.
There is another observation that there are schemes, but whether they are implemented.
Yes, I mean schemes by whom? By government of India or at the
Yeah, yeah.
international level?
Government, and now you have international also. But even in the domestic context, there are many schemes, but whether they are properly implemented to reach the deserving and aspiring, that is the issue.
Yes, I mean this is again an issue of supply and demand, and even if there is demand, there are certain. I mean, as I said, the information asymmetry is there. There will be supply of finance. There are schemes, but
I think,
how?
Dr. Prasanna, you have to define what is information asymmetry, because people may not be aware of it.
Oh, okay. So when we say information asymmetry, like for example, something is available somewhere, a particular loan, a scheme is available in a particular with a particular bank. I will have an advanced knowledge of how to access the particular product, how to approach the bank manager, when to approach. I will have more knowledge, advanced knowledge about it. Whereas a competitor or another entrepreneur, a woman in this context, may not have that knowledge. Just because I am there ahead of you, I will have more information about it. This difference in information, difference in knowledge about the availability of something is what we call as information asymmetry.
And in the gender perspective, I would like to add more. Like when a woman and a man goes, he provides information, or the bankers will be willing to ask more information. Whereas when a woman goes, whether she provides the full information or not, whether the banks are also are interested in gathering
Yes,
more information, that itself is the issue. So
correct,
the gender starts right from there. And you also suggested that what has to be done, so both the demand and supply side, that the networking, strengthening the networking. This is a era of networking. So women should
yes,
also get network with. That is what we have contributed here through Women's Studies Department, what we call Women Entrepreneurs Association of Tamil Nadu. So through this forum, people go and approach the banks, the district industry center, other financial institutions, and uh, use this name, WEAT, Women Entrepreneurs Association of Tamil Nadu, and get support better. So banks always look for a comfort point. You must be knowing that. So
correct.
this comfort level is one is networking. If you go through this network platforms, a comfort level is being created, and the bank themselves declare that wheat is a comfort level, one comfort level where we can look for sanctions. So
Right.
I think networking, as you rightly
Yes,
pointed out, is the need of that.
yes. I think
So if
this
there
is
are
where
more
the
questions, you can just see, and otherwise we can close. We just
so one comment is that this is where even your point on the comfort level is quite important, and I think this is where the study by Asian Development Bank is very helpful, because there they found that the bank did not reject the applications, rather the discrimination or in credit access to credit is not based on gender, but is only based on the history or level of comfort over the years. Like if in case of an established relationship, if the collateral everything is there, then there is no difference between a male entrepreneur and a female entrepreneur. So that gives us some confidence.
Yeah, exactly the point. Here's the collateral. Question of collateral is the
Right.
asset ownership. So the control over
Exactly.
resources and asset ownership is still on men, and even
Right.
if it is there on women, it is not active. So we have to start from the scratch. We
Yes,
have
you're
to
right.
go for equal property, right, and equal, and that should also be active. It's not simply for the sake of equal property. The paper will be there, but no access to. It has to be equally accessed by women also. She should have the liberty to even go on mortgage and get it done. As you pointed out, that more even in the top level, the more women owned firms are on personal finance rather than institutional finance. So that is very costly also, you said. No? So
Yes.
it is happening there for the micro entrepreneurs also. They, what you call in Tamil, Kanduvati. So they
Yes.
go and borrow, whether it is a tailor shop or any other small and micro enterprise. They feel better to deal with this non-formal finance or non-bank finance, because the fact that the bottlenecks, procedural bottlenecks with the formal credit or the bank credit. So I think these are the issues that need to be addressed while talking about women's participation in accessing to finance from the formal sector.
Yes. You're right, ma'am. I agree. The control on assets is a very, very important aspect in pledging the asset as a collateral.
I think, is there any questions? Further questions? No. So there is another observation: ideas are not required, only collateral plays a role. So that is true, practically speaking.
Yes. Right.
I think these are the questions. And if you want to say anything more, Dr. Prasanna, otherwise we can close.
Uh, I really would like to thank you and Dr. Prasanna and all the participants for giving this opportunity and having me today. And I hope I was able to provide some useful information to everybody. In case anyone
Definitely.
has more, yes, if I'll be happy to interact further. If anyone has any more questions or more ideas to discuss, I'm always open at any point of time. I can be reached through email or phone.
Thank you, Dr. Prasanna, for the lucid presentation. It was wonderful, and I think even the non-finance or non-economic or non-commerce students could also be able to catch your interaction better because of the kind of examples you shared, the literature you have read and shared here, and. In fact, as rightly in the beginning mentioned by Dr. Prasanna here, the presentation will be available. It is recorded and available, and you can also share your PowerPoint. We will upload that, and those who haven't got much, they can still refer that material and get hold of it. And we will provide a link also, and if they want to interact with you, they can do that. And so with this, we stop this presentation and interaction, and on behalf of the participants and our own behalf, Bharatdasan University and the various departments, the participants here, I only wish that my colleague Dr. Murugeshwari will be available to thank. I don't know whether she is there.
That's
Okay.
fine. When we can have it informally session.
So I thank you very much, Prasanna, for being here. And it's indeed a pleasure to have you over this video interaction. In fact, this is the first attempt, and we will have more such attempts to have in future, because this is going to be a webinar hour, at least for the COVID to go. So, on behalf of the participants, and also Beck and Rusa, I express my sincere thanks to Dr. Prasanna Venkatesan for the presentation on the international finance of the gender dimension. You really thrown light on the kind of gender issues, gender concerns, and also to a certain extent the literacy, financial literacy to at least these participants on certain concepts. So I thank you once again, and
Thank you, ma'am.
we wish that we will have more interaction to come in future.
Sure.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you. Thank you for the opportunity, ma'am. It was a wonderful session.